Welcome back. Last time I finished my episode off by unveiling a truly nonsensical piece of tech that allows me to create enchantments of unlimited power, using nothing but a couple of different kinds of magic sauce and more books than a local library. I'm going to call this uber enchanting, because over enchanting seems a little bit like an understatement. Now that the excitement around this miraculous technology has had a moment to die back a bit, it's time to shed the cold, harsh light of reality on the situation. I don't really stand to benefit anything by having infinite enchantments, no matter how cool the idea may sound on paper. To be clear, this is incredibly cool, and I will absolutely be devoting some time to exploring the possibilities on a video once I have systems capable of leveraging the technology. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really affect progression in any meaningful way. The problem is, my armor already defends me well enough, my weapons already do enough damage, my tools already break things plenty fast, and everything else is already easy to repair, repairs itself automatically, or is naturally unbreakable. And since you can't uber enchant spikes, there's really no reason to care about enchanting. My stance on this might change if I needed to, one-shot a Chaos Dragon or something, but until then, this really is one of those novelty technologies. The only really good use I could think of for uber enchanting was making a Hoe of Growth with Unbreaking Yes, and then just setting up an auto-clicker and making the most nonsensical semi-auto crop farm in existence. But a similar effect can just be accomplished by spamming bone meal, which I already have arbitrary amounts of, and I have long since passed the upper limit on how many farmed goods a person can grow without losing a bit of their soul. So yeah, the Gregtech New Horizons power curve is so steep that getting infinite enchantments, a quarter of the way through the mod pack, just doesn't even matter. I learned something new today. In other news, by this point I have moved my entire item hoard into a magic box with functionally limitless storage. Well, I think I did move all my stuff, at least. I have so much junk that I keep misplacing chests of it in weird spots. In this world, item storage is kind of like how rice is in real life for me, because just when you think you've finally gotten all of it into the pantry, all of a sudden a 50-pound bag of the stuff just shows up in your sock drawer to spite you. So after that, it's cleanup time. I may not have finished my magic box system, but I absolutely can take advantage of the fact that I have most of my items in one place, and I take the time to throw out several chests of garbage that have accumulated over my months of playtime. It is truly difficult to overstate how cathartic this is. Item logistics has been something of an unspoken nightmare this whole run, largely because of my own laziness, and fixing that is going to go a long way in preserving the tattered remains of my gray matter. With this system in play, I basically have free reign to mass produce whatever I want in however large of a quantity I want. My first targets are chrome and Certus quartz. Chrome, because I anticipate needing large quantities of stainless steel when I modernize into HV, and just kind of as a general crafting ingredient, and Certus quartz because I'm almost out already. Oh no, what a shame. Yeah, it's totally not like I don't have several spare barrels of the precursors sitting right next to a conveniently located crucible or anything. My next bulk crafting project is the creation of all of the fancy expensive garbage that I need to process platinum. This system that I'm designing, which is generally referred to with the oh-so-creative name of Platline by the people in the know, is used to process all of the platinum group materials in the periodic table. So things like platinum, osmium, iridium, all that junk, for those of you who didn't take 6th grade chemistry class. While the processing of most of them in their entirety is impossible at the moment due to tier limitations, I can just rip the platinum out and save the leftover precursors for when that changes. Since my ME system is still entirely lacking in fluid logistics, it's not going to be a gracefully automated process just yet, but I can at least get started with the heart of it. Before all that can happen, though, it's time for an extreme home makeover. Now that I have a non-zero quantity of multi-block builds in my arsenal, I can finally start putting down quote-unquote permanent systems that will consistently handle low-tier and automatable machine processing for me. This is going to be especially relevant for things like basic chemicals, which I am very much going to need in bulk, and I'm very much not going to want to spend time crafting by hand in the future. There are a number of ways of doing this that involve varying levels of skill, grace, and system flexibility, so my frequent viewers will no doubt be shocked that my approach to the problem can be best summarized as somewhere on the spectrum between rabid ape screeching and a caveman shouting "Ooga booga, Grug make more magic box," thus prompting the sudden need for large amounts of free space to fill with large box. This means it's time to say goodbye to the LV processing line. Most of the machines I already have higher tier variations of, and for the few exceptions to that rule, I can just make dedicated systems elsewhere. This space close to my ME system is simply too valuable to want to give up on redundant processing at the moment, so it needs to go away. To be quite honest, the only reason I even still have it bumming around is because it has a few special systems like canning, and also the entirety of my base's electric smelting. So really, this is not much of a sacrifice, and it probably should have gone away ages ago. It also means it's time to say goodbye to basically everything that was built on wooden planks, because aesthetics aside, the fact that I have to keep this part of my island lit up is kind of a liability at this point, and I need to clear out all the stuff I built on it anyway. I'm not immediately certain where I want to put my infusion altar and Thaumcraft stuff, but since I can integrate it with my ME system now, there is a case to be made for keeping it roughly in its current location. We will see. The only systems that get the pass are the smeltery of overcompensation and a little thing I put up on the far corner of my base to produce water. The overcompensation part of the smeltery does not make the cut, however, because I have roofs that I want to build. And, of course, the last step in the process is getting rid of all of the stupid planks themselves and replacing them with a more suitable flooring material. Like the same incredibly uggo cobblestone that the rest of my base is made out of, because if it ain't broke... Now, maybe my next New Horizons challenge run should just be that I'm not allowed to build anything ugly. Unironically, I do have a couple other really cool different challenge run ideas for this one when it's finished, though. No spoilers, because some of them are original and I have seen no mention of them anywhere else, but it ought to be interesting and possibly even more masochistic and impossible than this one. The end result of our Extreme Mode makeover is this. Wow, what an amazing looking open concept factory floor design that I can soon fill up with hundreds of ugly Technicolor machines. Let's get started. The first step in the extreme home ugification is expanding my ME system to be able to handle fluids. This is essentially the same process I used to make the system able to handle items, with the only difference being that the only storage cells I can make that hold fluids are restricted to holding a single type of them. Which is not a problem, because I can just make 30 of them. It'll take a little bit, mind you, but that is a solvable problem. The second step is hacking together a network with enough processing power to handle the automation of all of the junk that I'm going to need, which is going to be something of a recurring problem for a little bit. ME systems have a mechanic called channels. Every face of the controller, which is this rainbow glowy block in the middle of the system, is capable of handling a maximum of 32 of them. This would be more than enough for just about any other mod pack, and for the most part, I never really expand beyond a single block controller, but it is woefully insufficient when coupled with the fact that automating something as simple as hydrochloric acid requires 4 channels, and transporting those channels the huge distances that I'm going to need to with cables would require a lot of very expensive cable. The solution to this problem is to use something called peer-to-peer tunneling. Slap one of the peer-to-peer tunnels directly on the face of the controller, run a cheap cable line to where you want those 32 channels to be, put down a peer-to-peer exit point, link them up, power the whole system, and you can actually just condense channels by a factor of 32 for basically free. It's basically like just running your cable network through a zip file. My first batch of 8 large chemical reactors goes in without any real complications. I'm nudging them up to one another as much as possible, and only am going to be running them on MV to try and save on machine parts, but for simple chemicals, this is really all I'm going to need for a while. There are a few complications with the setup, namely that the tighter you pack multi-blocks, the less unique hatches you have access to. But again, I'm making simple chemicals, so this really is not a problem yet. With some clever machine part arranging, I could even double or triple up a few of my machines, which would let me make more than one chemical from a single system, though in the future I will probably want dedicated supplies for the basic chemicals anyway, so I don't worry about it too much. So, how exactly does this system work? Glass cable holds 8 channels. So, in order to do anything, I'm going to need to get any channels at all, which means I have to split off the network cable supplying the P2P line into a P2P exit point. After that, I could hook that exit point up to some more glass cable and power the whole thing with a bit of glass fiber, which gives me 8 channels directly to my main ME line, which is thankfully more than enough. Once that's done, let's take another super simple example, like water, for instance. I have in my ME a cell configured to only store water, and in theory it should store about 8,000 buckets. I'm going to want to make sure that I have at least a little bit of water on hand at all times just for incidental crafting, but I want most of that space to be empty as a buffer for when recipes overproduce water. To accomplish this, I can hook up a fluid import bus to an automated source of water, which in this case is just a thirsty tank, and then hook the bus up to a level emitter configured to measure how much water I have. The emitter will only turn on once I have a minimum quantity of water, at which point the system will know that it does not need to import any more water and will stop. At least, that's the theory. I ended up needing to restart my world before it worked for some reason, but this is how you do it. Water is an excellent proof of concept, but it is also very boring, so let's automate oxygen. My current preferred method for passive oxygen production converts redstone to oxygen at a very generous ratio using pretty inconsequential amounts of power. Of course, I have many other ways of getting oxygen, but this one is easy to automate, and since all of the components and its fuel supply is free, it is going to do just fine for now. A little bit of finagling with some machines and a touch of item logistics then let my system also produce spare obsidian in its downtime, and then the system is done. Automating for oxygen then is exactly the same as water. I make a dedicated oxygen storage cell, stick it in the system. I already have a channel line that I can tap into with enough channels, so I don't need to split off another peer-to-peer tunnel, and then I can just leech off the water line. This system needs 3 channels, 2 for intelligent fluid importing, and 1 to import the extra dust that the electrolyzer produces as a byproduct. And just like that, oxygen. Were I truly concerned about making this fully automated, I would also supply redstone from my system, but seeing as a full barrel of this stuff makes me like 24,000 cells of oxygen, I think I'm going to be okay for a bit. Now that I have water and oxygen set up, let's get a plat line running. I don't have a lot of the multi-blocks I would need to make this work well just yet, and fully integrating it into my ME system would be major overkill at this point, so I am instead going to use the classic death ball of item conduits and single block machines to fill the gaps in my tech tree. The ME system will occupy only as much space as is necessary to supply bulk resources. The first step in the process assumes we have something called aqua regia and platinum metallic powder, and it chemically reacts the two together to form a liquid intermediary whose name I don't care about, and some spare powders. My automation supplies aqua regia, and then fills those cells with the intermediary, and the powder will be packed and stored. Oh, and remember to connect your machines to power first, by the way. Shockingly, that makes them work a whole lot better. The liquid intermediary gets fed into centrifuges with ammonium chloride, and for now I'm just going to fill the tank up with it and let it sit, but in the future I will have to automate its production as well. Since centrifuging is the biggest bottleneck, I make 2, but the reality of the situation is I'm going to leave this thing to run overnight, so it doesn't really matter how slow it's going to be. The centrifuges then produce a bunch of dust, a fluid output, and cells of nitrogen dioxide and dilute sulfuric acid. The dust gets sent to be packaged up, and I will come back and deal with the fluid in a moment. But the cells need a little bit more finessing. The dilute sulfuric acid can be remixed with nitric acid to create aqua regia, thus recycling the resources, but in order to do that I need to re-acidify the waste nitrogen dioxide. Conveniently, this process requires water and oxygen. Wow, what a coincidence. So I can just hook up my ME system to supply a functionally infinite amount of them. It's almost like I knew that this was going to happen or something, isn't it? The mystery fluids that I mentioned earlier are palladium precursors, which I will need to process at some point, so I may as well get started with that as well. All I need to do at the moment is run it through a chemical reactor to make a dust, so I do that in a really weird way that will make sense to people who have done this before and won't matter to those who haven't. The next step in the process requires me to sift some of the platinum and palladium dust that I've been making into different kinds of platinum and palladium dust. Rather than pipe the items halfway across the universe, I decide to just move a spare EBF and sifter closer to the action and hook them up there. And this resulting platinum metallic powder and palladium metallic powders get reprocessed with more palladium precursor to make a different kind of dust, which is packaged and stored or reprocessed again, and then refined into platinum salt with this blast furnace to platinum, blah blah blah, and then the process continues. With the expansion of that disaster piece of the system comes the expansion of my demand for more resources. Principal among those demands is hydrogen, though other materials like copper, tin, silver, gold, wrought iron, rubber, basically everything else, have started to become more needed as well. My previous mob farm designs have done an admirable job of satisfying those requirements, considering that I was at one point literally working with dirt, but they are just not designed to scale, and even the most modern passive farm design has started to show its age. I need better mob spawn scaling, and a better source of raw materials. And for both of those, I need a better XP farm. No more messing around with clever designs, no more worrying about such trivial concerns as lag, no more systems designed to do everything. I just need an XP farm. Just an unfathomably large number of mobs shoved into a unfathomably pointy spike, and juiced like oranges as fast as unfathomably possible. To that end, my new design is painfully simple by the standards of basically everything that I do. It's a tube with a spike at the bottom, and a little bit of clever rifling in the tube to use mob cramming to force mobs onto the spike. At the bottom of this tube are 4 vacuum hoppers with a dedicated pump and bucket draining setup. And if that ends up being not enough, I will just put down another 4. And if that isn't enough, I will just put down another 4. And if that isn't enough, you get the point. There is plenty of space here, and I am done with messing around. Item logistics is simple. Save the drop that spawns more mobs, which is in this case rotten flesh, and throw the rest away. The rotten flesh will then get run up into an open crate from Britannia with a redstone-controlled item conduit, because dispensers simply are not good enough anymore, and I can scale this sucker up to 2 stacks of rotten flesh a second, just by adding some extraction upgrades. Open crates also drop items in the exact center of the block, so I can guarantee their placement every single time. The XP flux from this farm will be far too large to reliably run through some of my ad hoc auto-crafting disaster pieces, so I sprang for a whopping 4 Project Red auto-crafting benches that I could have used like 3 tiers ago. These systems offer me basically everything I could want in an auto-crafting setup. They don't void items, they return my buckets, they have super easy input and output controls, and have a blisteringly high crafting speed. All at the cost of requiring electrotine power, and there are only 2 ways of getting it. I opted to go the solar power route, although truthfully it doesn't seem like it matters much either way, because these autocrafters mostly seem to think energy consumption is optional, and to say that they consume no power would be only a minor overstatement. So as long as the sun shines once every 3 weeks or so, I think I will be just fine. Before I power the system up, I make sure that the zombie barrel is filled entirely with tripwire blocks. Infernal mobs still have that horrible habit of leaving cobwebs everywhere they exist, so I see no reason to enable their littering habits when I have the power to prevent them. After that, I install the schematics that control what my project benches craft, throw the bees in, and light the whole system up. evidence seems to indicate that it is working better than I possibly could have imagined. The only problem I can find with this design is that open crates drop items so perfectly that the zombies suffocate themselves from cramming damage before they jog themselves loose. So I just swapped the cable anchor out for some spectral glass, and that solves the problem just fine. Yeah, so if you ever thought anything I made before was too loud, let me enlighten you a little bit here. Also, it should really go without saying, but please, for the love of everything that is good in the world, do not make one of these on a public server unless you are very certain you know what you are doing. So, what can I do with just a slight hair under infinite experience an hour? As it turns out, quite a lot of things, because infinite experience means I have infinite, easy-to-replenish supplies of a wide assortment of basic crafting materials, which means quite a lot of things that cost me a lot of money before now only cost me the processing time involved in making them. Having access to a small supernova of charcoal also means I will have an easy source of hydrogen once I do a bit of automation. And I also realized that it opened up an energy production option for me that I hadn't considered before, namely that of multi-block gas turbines. Gas turbine multi-blocks are essentially the little sister of combustion engine multi-blocks. They're made from stainless steel instead of titanium, which makes them hilariously cheap to build compared to my current game stage, and unlike their combustion engine siblings, which need oxygen and lubricant and, titanium, they will slowly consume items called turbines, which also control their ideal fuel consumption and energy production rates and do a bunch of other things that we don't care about. EV dynamo hatches, which are needed to output EV amperage and are kind of the whole reason that I care about the multi-block system at all, require a small amount of tungsten steel to make, but I am very close to being able to produce that now that the plat line is running, so that isn't really as much of a concern now as it was before when I was making the nuclear reactor. Because of my near-total mastery of all things Magitech, I also happen to have a stupidly overpowered turbine-making material at my disposal. Shadow metal from Malefica is a dirt-cheap ore made from stone and a bunch of common essentia types, and after a very small amount of processing, it can be turned into some of the best turbines in the entire game. While their efficiency rating is marginally less than Manulin, which I couldn't get right now anyway, their durability stands head, shoulders, knees, and ankles above anything else that I will be able to produce for at least 2 voltage tiers. And that combination of amazing durability, incredibly cheap production price, and very comparable efficiency remains competitive until the last handful of endgame materials start showing up. I want these really badly. Of course, the first step to this is upgrading my EBF, which hopefully won't be too miserable. Titanium is easy, platinum isn't easy, but I have enough of it for now, and vanadium is easy, so all I really need to do is wait until my next round of coil blocks process. While that avalanche of crafting projects percolates away in the background, I get myself a multi-block furnace. The fact that I haven't made one of these things yet is incredible to me, and I attribute that entirely due to the fact that my traditional Gregtech progress has been peanut buttered out between week-long stints of bee breeding. Like every other multi-block in the pack, it scales with better stuff, but I'm cheap, so I just use the old stuff for it. Because really, it doesn't need to be super fast, it just needs to be marginally faster than a pile of rocks and decaying plant matter that I threw together before I knew how electricity worked, which, until my recent renovation work, was basically how most of my smelting got done. I decide to bump the stainless steel out of the queue and put the TPV alloy for my coils in to cook instead. This stuff is going to take a whopping 8.8 hours to smelt, and I am starting to get the progression itchies again. Speaking of progression itchies, I'm in an EV. Isn't it time to finally stop using Stone Age backpacks to transport my items? Using the incredible power of shiny metal rings on a large quantity of tanned, dried, stitched wax, acidified, and forming pressed skin of my enemies, I can vastly increase my carrying capacity for no appreciable reason whatsoever. If I'm going to be using gas turbines to power my base, I'm going to want to stockpile a bunch of spare turbines. Yes, it's confusing. I'm talking about the consumable ones, to keep my machines supplied. Sure, I could be sensible and just make a couple, but if a little more is a little better, why shouldn't a lot more be a lot better? This is at least how I justify dumping a backpack and a half of materials down a crucible, netting myself a hair under 9 stacks of shadow metal ore in the process. I also start applying this philosophy to bees, because while mob and XP farming gives me an exceptional amount of flexibility in what I could manufacture, I'm going to need materials in bulk that are difficult or impossible to source that way, and for that I'm going to have to turn to bees. This requires alvearies, which need wood, which in turn requires me to somehow generate an enormous amount of some kind of non-redwood log, because for some reason redwood logs don't count as logs for most crafting projects. Oh no. Bulk wood production? How terrible. All this means for me is that I get to show off another way to crash a server. Are server killers, redwood saplings, understandably banned on your server? Do you hunger for the power that comes from obliterating the pleasure others get out of online video game playing with their peers through the power of TPS destroying tree farms? Look no further than the rainforest oak sapling. Unlike most other saplings, rainforest oaks happily grow in all sorts of obnoxious places, and always grow the exact same way, the exact same time. Lumber axes, from Tinker's Construct, only really care about whether there is a mostly uninterrupted path from the log you break to a foliage block with a view of the sky, and they don't do things like reality checks to confirm things like basic sanity are also being respected. Case in point, as far as a lumber axe is concerned, this is a tree. Seems pretty much like a tree. But lumber axes will also say that this is a tree, even though it's clearly 8 trees in a line. More interesting to me, though, is that lumber axes also happen to think that this is a tree, even though every sane person I know would tell you this is a block of wood that has some leaves stuck on it. Now, some people might make the entirely valid point that 23 barrels of logs is a tad excessive. They are correct, but to counterbalance that point, I would like to make my own, which is lumber axe. Oh, and it's time to put back the infusion altar. As promised, I just kinda wang it on to a huge block of enderwood planks and call it a day. No muss, no fuss, and certainly no aesthetic appeal whatsoever. Though the planks do have the benefit of actually looking like something I might want to build with normally, so there is at least that much. They don't match the Eldritch Goose Juice sacrifice altar or the concrete factory floor, but I will take what I can get. And yes, as always, I put in the infusion altar upside down. This happens to me every time. Alvearies will require a large number of circuits to get running. I do not have a large number of circuits, despite having already spent a considerable amount of my life making them and documenting that effort not like a video ago. I've had it up to here with this nonsense. So that's it. I'm getting my mallet. Let's see what the game thinks of me making 32 stacks of MV circuits. Oh, and also I'm also sick and tired of having to do all of my circuit processing in a shoebox. So, wham. Mallet. Problem solved. Sort of. It's still basically just a bigger shoebox, but I will take what I can get. Given that my combustion systems are no longer going to be expanded, I opt to power it with a tank of benzene and a single block gas turbine, with a honking big battery buffer on the inside to accommodate for the very small energy throughput of that one single block machine. My clean room processing is going to need more power very soon, but it'll do for now. After one quick trip out to be a functional human being, my EBF has completed the first half of my TPV in the background. I went with the more is more approach here, and am planning on just making enough coils for a second EBF because waiting on these things to smelt is making me go a little bit batty. Also, I may have gone slightly overboard with copper foil. Just a little bit. Shockingly, making 32 stacks of circuits requires a whole lot of plastic, which requires ethylene. The wheat for ethylene is easy to get, but ironically, digging dirt has become something of a time-consuming and inconvenient task, hence why I'm making yet another kind of fancy shovel. Also, I know that in principle my infusion altar is super stable right now, but I gotta say, it really does not look like it. This infusion matrix is kind of channeling drunken chimpanzee driving a limousine down the interstate energy. Once the first batch of TPV is done, I pause the EBF long enough to swap the coils out from Frosty Blue Raspberry to Neon Tutti Fruity, sneak a few jobs in before the TPV goes back in, and then crank it up and send it on its way again. The mallet must continue. But sadly, the mallet also requires annealed copper and doesn't have access to graphite for an arc furnace, so it has to use the very expensive EBF to do it. Or does it? By completing the Divine Rod of the Gods quest, I get access to a quest where you can buy samples of ore which you're supposed to use for divining. Diamond ore is an option, so if I get lucky with my byproducts, I can maybe get a piece. Fun fact, before the Thaumcraft recipe that allows you to transpose basaltic mineral sand to granitic mineral sand existed, the quest I just used was the only way to get granitic mineral sands for blood magic. Sure makes me glad I'm not doing this run on an older version, yeah? Ugh. My maceration, ore washing, and thermal centrifuging processes aren't cooperative, but I got lucky and got a graphene drop from the last maceration attempt on the centrifuged ore. Even if I didn't get it on this round, I could just purchase another ore in a couple of hours and try again, but it is nice to have this out of the way. With access to excessive amounts of annealed copper and an entire night to work itself out, my circuit components finish up and are ready to craft by the next morning. Once again, I take the time to praise my ME system because the components needed to craft these things fill up almost 5 diamond chests. I put my spare Costco of crafting materials together, hook it up to the sole single puny little circuit fabricator in my possession, and then look around to find something to do for the next 5.7 hours. By this point, I have started to produce tungsten steel. This material, combined with circuits that I have yet to begin producing, is the gateway to IV, and unlocks a great deal of useful side technologies, multi-block build nonsense, and quality of life improvements. I expect the next couple of videos will see some very interesting things start to happen very quickly, but I am sadly out of time for this one. Thank you for your time and for your interest, because as of this recording, my channel just broke about 20,000 subscribers, and people have been shockingly supportive of the series thus far. Your support is both substantial and is personally appreciated. Normally, this is where I'd bid you farewell, but I actually have an announcement to make. Since I'm going to have some more free time here in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be starting up a second series where I dip my toes into hardcore RL craft, with a little bit of a goose twist added in to keep the process interesting for people who already are familiar with the Modpack or simply hate it with a burning passion. For some people, this may not be your cup of tea, given the divisive nature of the pack's less than player-friendly design. But I do legitimately find it enjoyable to play, and I hope that I can sway some of you over to my side. My Gregtech upload schedule will remain entirely uninterrupted, So if you don't care about RLCraft at all, know that nothing will be changing with there. With that said, YouTube buttons are in the YouTube button location, and as always, I hope you enjoyed.